So, okay. Okay, if there are no questions about that, let me just go back to the file that we looked at last time. We have factorial, we have swapping by reference. I have not uploaded this zip file yet because I just recovered that from the corrupted hard drive from last time. And this is our factorial program. It does not have global variables anymore. Okay, remember, one of our objectives of using parameters is to get rid of global variables. But this program, even though it does not use global variables, it still has some problems. Okay, the problem has to do with this part here. If you just look at line 14 and line 15, it works. Okay, in other words, the first line, your line 14, will invoke factorial. It will compute the factorial of 3 and have it stored back into the variable x, which is local to main. And then the second line, or line 15, will print the result out. Now, so this it may seem like that we have solved the problem, and the answer is yes, we do. We have solved the problem of having to rely on global variables. On the other hand, if I have multiple variables, it is possible that I use one variable here as x, but when I print or when I utilize the result, I can mistakenly use another variable for that purpose. Okay? In other words, it would be nice if I can somehow say print not x, but print the result of 3 factorial immediately. That would be nice. Okay, if I can just have a subroutine to compute a value, okay, some sort of result, and then have the result of the subroutine to be used immediately instead of having to go through a variable passed by reference. Are you guys understanding what I'm trying to say? Why this program still is not ideal, even though I got rid of global variables altogether. Okay. So what we'll do today is to introduce the new concept that we have not talked about before, which is called returning values from a subroutine. Okay, now this is one of those things where it does get a little bit cumbersome to look through it from the trace perspective, but I still think it is necessary to do that because we want to understand the mechanism of returning values. Okay. Are there any questions so far about any of this material? No questions so far. Okay, let's go ahead and write a very simple program that uses a single return value. And as we do that, I'll pass along the worksheet. And this time I'll define a subroutine called number. Okay, just fairly generic name. And it doesn't do anything. It does not do any computation. The only thing it does is to return, let's say 8. Okay, that's all it does. Now, the return statement is something that we have not seen before, unless you have read the notes ahead of me. This is not something that we have talked about at this point. And define sub. So the subroutine doesn't do anything. Okay, all it does is to return, you have a single statement called a return statement, and it returns the value of 8. Okay, we don't quite know what it does, but that's what the program specifies. And then outside of the subroutine, I have one single statement. It's print. Okay, we already know what print does. Okay, whatever value you specify to the right-hand side of print, it will just display it on the screen or put it onto a piece of paper or something like that. But this time, I'm not asking it to display anything that is out of an expression. I'm putting the invoke statement inside the print statement. Okay? So we'll go ahead and see what this does. This is our entire program, a 4-line program, but it should be enough to illustrate the basic mechanism of returning a value. Let me save that first. Okay, I call this simple return because it is the simplest case of returning a value. and then we'll trace it in another window. In sheet 2. Here is our line number, and we don't have any global variables. So the precondition, there's nothing to say about the precondition. Okay. So the first thing we want to do, what is the first line that I should execute in this case? Line 4, because that's the only line outside of the definition of a subroutine. Okay, that's pretty easy. Okay, now this time when we execute line 4, even though it has an invoke in it, I don't use return line number anymore. Okay, all the way up to here, every time I invoke a subroutine, I always have a return line number column so that I can tell which line am I supposed to go back to when the subroutine is all done. But in this case, I don't want to do that. Okay, let's just kind of imagine what happens when I use return line number to remember where I'm supposed to go back to. What do you think I should put here? Well, first of all, why am I invoking a subroutine to begin with? I'm trying to execute line 4. Do I know what to print before I invoke the subroutine called number? No. So I have to invoke the subroutine first just to find out what I'm supposed to print. Okay? So that's the whole reason why we have to allocate column B as a return line number. When I'm done with the subroutine number, which line am I supposed to go back to? Post. Now, if I go back to post, that means I'm not printing anything.
Line 4.
So I have to specify line 4 so I can do the printing. But if I only specify line 4, then I'm just going back and redo the whole thing all over again. In other words, if I just specify a line number, I cannot remind myself which part of that line is still yet to be done. Okay? Because at this point, once I'm done with invoking number, the next thing I should do on line 4 is just to print it out. Okay? I should not be calling number again. That is why I cannot use just the line number to remind myself what to do or where to continue execution. I have to now rely on what I call return info, which contains more information than just the line number. Okay? Return info is basically saying the line number itself, but in addition to the line number itself, it almost is a copy of that line, except for one thing. Line 4 is print invoke number. Now, because invoke number is what caused me to be invoking something, I replace the invocation itself with a single question mark. Okay? Is that okay so far with the mechanism? What we put into the column called return info. So later on, we'll see why I put a question mark here. The question mark is a placeholder. It's a placeholder so that later on, if I have a return statement in the subroutine, that value, whatever I'm returning, will be used to replace this question mark. And that's why there's a single question mark as a placeholder to hold the place where the return value is supposed to go when I execute the return value, return statement. Okay? Now that I have remembered where I'm supposed to go back to and how to continue execution, I can go into the subroutine. The subroutine has only one single action line. The other lines are not really actions. Line 2 is the only line that does anything in the subroutine. And the way you specify the return value is you copy and paste the return info cell. And then you replace the question mark with whatever value that the return statement is specifying. In this case, it is a single constant of 8, and therefore the question mark is replaced by the value of 8 because we are returning a value of 8. Is it okay so far? Now, all I'm doing, it is very important to remember when I execute line 2 of this pseudocode, I am not printing anything. All I'm doing is to figure out what I'm supposed to print, but the printing comes later. I am not executing line 4. I'm only filling in the blank place of line 4. Line 3 is the end of a subroutine, and this part works exactly the same way as before. We deallocate the column, in this case column B, just like what we usually do before. And then we have to go back to line 4 because return info tells me that I'm supposed to continue execution on line 4. When we do get back to line 4, I actually do need one column for comments. Line 4 does not look like this anymore. When I get back to line 4 looks like this, which means, do I have to do anything else before I print? Is there anything left for me to do? Nope, I'm ready to print, and as a result, I just print the value of 8 to the screen, and I'm all done. In other words, in this entire trace, the key of this entire trace would be these two cells. The first one, or row 4, column C, is what you need to write down in the return info cell when you are invoking a subroutine, but only as a part of a line. The second one, on row 5, that's when we execute the return statement. The return statement does only one thing. It looks at, it copies and pastes the return info cell. It replaces the single question mark with whatever value it is supposed to be returning. It does not execute that statement at this time. All it does is to fill in the blank so that later on I can execute the statement. Are we doing okay so far with the concepts? Okay. So if we're okay with the concepts, I will create another sample program. So we'll go ahead and create a new spreadsheet. Close this one. This time we make it just a little bit more convoluted. Okay, not by a whole lot, just a little bit. We'll call this number again, and we'll just make it do exactly the same thing as before, and define sub. And outside of the subroutine, I still have that one single print statement, but this time I'm going to do this. I will say invoke number plus invoke number. Okay. In other words, I have two invokes on the same line this time, which makes it slightly different from the previous one. So let's go ahead and find out how we can deal with this type of construct where on the same line we have something to do after the invocations, but there are two invocations to handle because I have to compute the sum of the return values of these two invocations. And this is actually a pretty good exercise. This particular program is a good exercise to see whether we actually understand the mechanism of returning a value. We need comments, but we won't need it for a while, so I'm going to scroll it off the screen for the time being. We have line number. There's a precondition. There's nothing to say because there are no global variables. In other words, at this point on line 4, there are no variables to talk about. There are no parameters, no variables. We're just going to set up some at this point. Once again, we need to specify a return info instead of a return line number because the invocations are not taking the entire line all by themselves. It is a component of the statement of this line. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing as before. We basically just copy the entire line, except for the invocation that we are taking care of at this point. Now, which one should I take care of first? The left-hand side or the right-hand side? Yep, the convention is to take care of the left-hand side first. Okay, so we will just take care of that one, which means the other one is exactly the same way